Welcome back to another episode of the Disruption Decade podcast. And we continue to really explore how the entire world is facing what is really known as the pandemic of 2020. And the idea is that how does business operate in the future? We're going to explore some ideas and also some topics from an author of Chasing the Black Unicorn, which is Marek Zmysłowski. Great to have you on the show.
Thanks for the invitation. Great to be here.
Yeah, so Marek, let's go into the book itself. First of all, I love the name. I want to kind of talk a little bit about the book itself. What exactly is it about? And tell our audience kind of how the book kind of came about.
Yeah. Long story short, I have spent almost 10 years of my professional life on the African continent building online businesses in a broader definition. And that type of those type of adventures have brought me many extreme situations, both from the positive angle, like negative. On the positive side, one of the companies we've built ended up going public last year on the New York Stock Exchange, which is a great experience. On the other side, I became a victim of an extortion attempt. And by extortion attempt, I mean violently, including criminal activity of trying to take over my company by criminals in Nigeria. And there was involved police in this. I basically ended up becoming a most wanted person by the Interpol. And that's the extremely negative adventure that happened to me. And I figured there's not enough business books in terms of running business in Africa. And what happened to me might be an interesting story for a reader. And also writing the book was for me a specific type of catharsis and lesson for myself as well, because many things make sense when you look at them from the hindsight.
Yeah, and I like the approach because, business authors is, as you know, being able to provide that kind of context to young entrepreneurs or startups, really understanding how to navigate waters in countries like Africa, but also worldwide in Europe and even in the United States and South America. Some of these same challenges do exist. One thing that is, and kind of segues into the topic of today's discussion, is kind of how the entrepreneurial landscape is going to evolve beyond the pandemic of 2020 with the coronavirus. And two of the topics that I think your expertise weighs in on very well is the area of both online and online travel, and then also consumer confidence in terms of retail and how consumers are going to start to re-engage in economies from a global standpoint. I know you, of course, are based there in Barcelona right now. Let's go into those two topics. First, addressing the online travel concept and what you think travel is going to look like on the other side of the pandemic itself. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah. So it seems like the world has implemented a very unified approach to the corona crisis. I'm talking about global lockdown everywhere. But the continents are so different from each other, both economically and culturally. Just Africa as a continent, that's 54 countries, different economies, hundreds of languages, tribes, etc. But there are certain things which you can see that they happen in the same way. Obviously, online travel has totally become shut down. And already the estimations tell that the total loss in online travel because of this particular crisis will be 10 times the size of the total losses which we incurred after 9/11. However, I think there's a silver lining to this, because when you look deeper into online travel sector, you will realize that on the hotel booking side, you have actually a duopoly. There's a Booking.com holding and Expedia holding that together control 80% of all the online bookings. You can name many different online brands. They probably belong to one of these holdings. When you look at airline tickets sales, 80% of all the airline tickets sold, maybe 75, 70, are controlled by any one of two systems, another duopoly, Amadeus and Sabre. Those type of companies are huge, are big, and slow in response. They don't really have that much cash free floating, as you would expect. They're going to get a huge hit right now. A lot of small companies in travel industry will die, but it's much easier for those companies to also resurrect. And when the crisis ends and new companies will start to build their positions from scratch again, those big monsters will not have as much power to keep the status quo as they used to have. So I believe that there's a chance to leveling out the playing field. On top of the fact that people won't travel as much, they would prefer to travel maybe closer home to also be able to go back home. They will prefer to choose smaller resorts, smaller hotels, more going to villas, boutique hotels, not to stay around too many people at once. So that's also a chance for the long tail of the industry. Because the big hotels, the big resorts will definitely get a hit because the travel habits might change.
So I like the approach. I mean, we have seen some of this happen in some spaces, especially in retail. If you look at Luxottica and their control on the eyeglass industry, and of course, companies like Warby Parker, which was one of the few that were able to break through. I do understand where you're going with the idea of online booking when you will look at companies like Hotel.com or Hotel Tonight, which was recently acquired by Airbnb. You know, there's a lot of that type of movement in the space and I think you're right when you look at the demand obviously over a period of time, whether that's the next year or 18 months or even 2 years, the reduction in consumer demand on travel is definitely going to have a worldwide effect. Do you feel like we're going to hit an 18-month window of challenge here, or do you feel like we'll see travel resume sooner than that?
So whenever I don't know what's going to happen in the future, I always try to search for an answer in the past. And I remember two very interesting situations from the last century that happened to us. The first one was the Marshall Plan, when Europe was destroyed after Second World War. Yep. The stimulus plan was so effective because the whole Europe was really hungry to get back to that development growth, the trajectory. And Europe became stronger than ever after this regeneration, if you can call it like this. And when you look even more back to the past, you would remember the 1920s, post-Spanish flu and post-First World War, when you had that time in the US called the Roaring Twenties, when people were really hungry of, just having a nice lifestyle because they just realized that they can just die because of some stupid flu or war. And people became much more adventurous during those times. And I would really like to hope that we have a control and we might active like that and not become even more scared and even more controlled by fear.
Right. Yeah. One advantage, though, I think we had in the 20s was we didn't have social media. And we definitely didn't have mainstream media in the structure that we have now. So the challenge will definitely be how consumers kind of deal with their own psyche and their own mental health post-pandemic. So it's going to be interesting to really, I mean, if you look back at 9/11, the impact on travel was pretty significant, even though 9/11 was still a very small micro event. From a standpoint versus what we're dealing with now in the coronavirus pandemic, where it is a global event that's really affecting businesses of all kinds to the extent of bankruptcies. You're out of business now for 90 days. The restaurant and hospitality industry, of course, taking an amazing hit here in the United States. All right, so this could go either way. I think a lot of experts are looking at it as much like what you just mentioned, where people have been cooped up for so long, they're just going to bounce right back, and we're going to see the economy and also habits start to move forward fairly quickly. Do you look at let's stay on travel and hospitality, because I do like your approach in terms of the regional players becoming more prevalent. I think, if someone like an EasyJet there in Europe, I think is going to probably prevail. But let's take a look at a company like Airbnb, which obviously is a different style in itself. How do you feel about Airbnb's prospects as we kind of come out of this?
Yeah, so structurally, and when you compare Airbnb to Booking.com and Expedia, it's still a startup. They are so much faster and more lean in terms of making decisions. I remember they have launched a new type of service, which is like remote experience 1 week after the lockdown. That would would never happen, unfortunately, with the big guys. So that's one. They can react to those type of situations much faster. And two, Airbnb really has built its position on inventory. I'm talking about those side gig landlords, side gig owners of flats, restaurants, etc. Expedia and Booking.com, that was always the weakest part. The adoption of online tools within that particular inventory type was always the weak side of those giants. So Airbnb has the biggest advantage in that particular inventory. So I believe that they might be one of the big winners of this situation. And remember, they were launched in 2008. They already know how it is to build a business in the crisis.
So Marek, do you see any other travel-related companies or concept that might be able to make it out of this, or maybe even be reinvented post-pandemic?
I think there is a big chance for a lot of disruption in the way airline tickets are distributed. Because what was the case for many years is that you had those airlines that had pretty expensive tickets, and then you have a lot of costs already and services included into the ticket cost, like printing the boarding pass, taking your luggage, etc., Wi-Fi if there was one. And now you see that all those cheap airlines are actually selling tickets at a very cheap fare. But then everything else you have to pay extra. That's the business model that seems to be more and more popular among airlines. And so that's like an upselling. And this is basically very popular among online travel. It's not a new thing. All the hotels in Las Vegas are super cheap because they're making money on casino. Online travel agencies would many times sell you a flight ticket even below their internal cost because they're going to make money by selling you a hotel, a visa processing service, or a car rental. So airlines wanted to do the same, to sell tickets cheaply to get the client, own the client, and then upsell him all those additional services, including, entering the flight, the airplane before anyone else. You can charge for that extra. That was not impossible if you were selling your ticket as an airline through one of those two big companies like Amadeus and Subred. Their technology didn't allow for that. Now there are new players coming into life that allow those type of flexible content distribution to the airlines, and that airlines will have way more room to play with when they acquire their clients. And I think I would observe that particular sector, part of the market.
Yeah, it's almost as if we saw like a Hotel Tonight break out of the airline booking space, because obviously Hotel Tonight acquired by Airbnb, that was a service and still is a service that I use religiously up to when we stopped traveling. But before that, it was the number one way that I would get hotels, and the way that they were flexing out their offerings, doing last minute bookings, giving you different kind of features that you could not get in your traditional hotel booking sites. I think you're exactly right, is there's going to be an innovator that comes out of this on the other side, especially with airlines obviously going to be struggling, I think, to get passengers over the next maybe 12 to 18 months down the road. So it'll be interesting to see how that fleshes out. Let's go into mass gatherings, and this is meetings, expos, because this is going to lead into my last question for you around consumers. But when you look at mass gatherings, meetings, expos, symposiums, large trade shows, what are your thoughts on that, on how and if the industries will come back in their entirety?
If any sector will be, it seems like this particular sector will be opened lastly. Because we're probably going to see that lockdowns, there will be stages in what type of businesses can go back to a normal life. It seems like the mass gatherings will be the last one. That's the short term, very pessimistic observation. However, in the long term, if technology was supposed to make mass gatherings and conferences and all those type of events obsolete, it would already have happened. And I believe there's a certain level of human connection that you just cannot replace with technology. And maybe on a smaller scale, they're still going to keep their place. Maybe they're going to become more premium, just like what happened to press. Obviously, the total consumption of press has went down. I'm talking about printed press, but the quality has gone up because people still stick to the experience of I'm just touching the paper, and that has a certain touch and smell.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think the whole evolution will be a mix of both in real life but very premium events, and then virtual events for more online education, more of the utilitarian aspect of events versus the networking aspect of it, for sure. Okay, so let's go into consumer confidence. And you had a really great post on your blog. It was, in fact, one of the things that really focused on us getting you on the show, and that was your idea of where consumer trends were going in returning to retail, restaurants, et cetera. What are your thoughts there in terms of how consumers will be coming back into the marketplace in terms of spending?
Yeah, I was trying to analyze what's the common knowledge about human behavior, what do behaviorists tell about customer behavior change, and then what the numbers say. Because right now we are all thinking that, people have to buy stuff online because there's no other way. And people have to now make video calls because there's no other way. There's no other alternative way. And many of them will stay with that particular new approach after this is all done. And my question is, how long does this new situation have to take place for, so this new habit becomes a real habit? Maybe this lockdown will not be that long in the end. I looked at e-commerce, and then you see that obviously there are certain categories that have exploded in terms of demand, like home workout equipment or machine that allows you to bake bread. And after a month, you will see the demand for hair cutting accessories. But on the other hand, fashion goes down because you're not going to buy another dress or another shirt just to show it to your dog or to your wife that is with you anyway. So the total net result is not much has really changed. Then when you look at food delivery companies, and you would say that they have won a lottery, just like video conferencing. And I would argue that not necessarily. I'm actually involved as an advisor in one of those type of companies, because people are afraid for the future. They have way more time. They cook more in their houses. Right. So restaurant orders demand has been slashed almost by 50%. Obviously depends on the market. What everyone has now looking at is the increase and bigger demand in ordering grocery online. But company that has been doing food delivery online cannot just switch to grocery, because grocery is a great business. You get paid both by the client for delivery and by the restaurant commission for the client. The food is prepared by the restaurant, so you only have to take care of the delivery. With grocery, supermarkets either don't have a deal with you or pay you very little, and it takes a lot of time to go to the shop and find the stuff that the client wanted. So actually, many companies that have quickly branched out from food delivery to grocery they have a lot of issues with making any money out of it, especially when they don't have access to the live inventory of the supermarket. So it's not as pink as you could see. In the end, businesses will definitely act faster now, because if everyone goes into remote work and everyone goes into video conferencing, it's a strategy. It has its upsides and downsides. Definitely businesses will act faster now. They will meet faster other people. They will make sales faster. They will grow faster. They will also bankrupt faster. It's a double-edged sword. We can discuss about different types of changes in the digital space, which companies will win, which companies will get the bigger piece of the pie. What's the point of increasing the piece of your pie if the whole pie is shrinking because the whole economy is going into crisis? So again, it's you can look at it from both ways.
Yeah. So in terms of technology, so the sticking factor, because that's the thing that I've talked to several psychologists and human behavior, consumer behavior specialists that talk about developing habits. And developing habits sometimes, if done enough and with positive results, can take over a person's whole approach toward everything, whether it's cooking at home, whether it's working from home through a virtual aspect. Even in the medical field, I'm doing a lot of research in that around virtual medicine. And what I'm finding is a lot of it is the behavior of the patients themselves that are actually preferring the virtual medicine experience once they go into it, because of the time frame and the amount of time that they have to allocate to go to a doctor's office, deal with being around a bunch of other sick people, versus just being able to go in and do a telehealth or a telemedicine experience, which changes everything. So if we do see a reduced traffic amount around all of these aspects, whether it's retail, food service, even grocery delivery and grocery experiences, with all of that kind of shrinking, do you see the marketplace itself, and you kind of referred to this, kind of changing in their own rights in terms of everything from smaller footprints, less retail locations, much more online? What are your thoughts about that?
As long as everything boils down to how people will look at the future, and if we are able at some point to create a spiral, an acceleration of positive news that this is all over and it's all going to be better now, and the economy will be back on track and will be back stronger than ever. That will change the whole paradigm of all the cases we're now discussing. So it all depends whether we will be on a track of recovery to become stronger than ever, or we will be always on a track of damage control.
Yeah.
I do believe that as long as the digitalization is done in a healthy way, so you're improving what can be improved, and you're staying with where the improvement doesn't necessarily happen, then you're good. Then there can only be a positive effect because you're adding value to the market. You mentioned telemedicine. I mean, it's amazing that you can do now certain consultancies with doctors remotely because he doesn't have to meet you always face to face.
Right.
But when you talk about psychology issues, you want to meet the person face to face from time to time, feel his energy, maybe shake his hand. So that's the extreme. We're going digital all in, may be worse than what was before.
Yeah, for sure.
So digitalization in a healthy way, as a process, yes. Forcing everything to go digital, I do not think so. And I remember, I make money on digitalization.
Yeah, no, and I would agree with that in the sense that if you look, let's just take telemedicine for instance. If you look at the facilities that's required to be able to see, let's say you have a staff of 10 doctors, and most doctors are seeing anywhere between 20 and 30 patients a day in person, because it's a huge mill of people coming in and out. So if you look at that and the facilities that it takes to run that type of operations, maybe 50% of those patients are mostly well checks, which could be done via virtual or telemedicine.
Correct.
That reduces your facilities. It reduces your strain on staff, reduces the facilities itself, or the requirement of that kind of clinic. So I look at that as being a potential, as if we look at virtual coming, if anything comes out of the coronavirus, what I think it will show us over time is that digital and certain elements of virtual replacement is probably a good thing, just to be able to reduce the amount of pressure and what could be a lot of wasted carbon out there in the world of doing things an old way versus doing something in a new model that I think starts to change the industry for sure. All right, so last couple of point I wanted to talk with you about the trend here that we're starting to see, and that obviously kind of a forced trend. In Europe, you're in Barcelona right now. Have you seen consumers start to return to their habits? Has Spain started to open any retail as of yet?
So supermarkets are always open because they're considered essential goods, supermarkets and pharmacies. And besides that, Spain has one of the strictest rules in the world. Actually, interesting fact, the strictest rules right now are in South Africa, where you can't do anything besides going to the pharmacy and supermarket. Even e-commerce is not working. Only you can get stuff yourself. You can't even buy alcohol or drugs, only food and pharmacy.
This is what has happened? South Africa?
That is South Africa. So African countries have really amazing problem because self-isolation is not possible. People live there's 10 people living on 8 square meters in townships and lower income parts of society. 85% of people in Africa live day by day. If they don't work today in the morning, they will have no food to eat in the evening. The self-isolation is not an option. So once someone gets sick in the township, the whole township gets sick immediately. What really saved Africa is that they really locked down their air borders pretty fast. There was 10 times more flights from Wuhan to Western Europe than to Africa. So proportionally, Africa has locked down their borders much faster, and that's really what saved them. That's what really gives us hope. Coming back to Spain, so this is not doable, right? I'm not able to go to any retail store besides my supermarket next to me. If I go somewhere too far, police will stop me. They will see where I live. They will see where I went to the shop, and they can give me a ticket because they will tell you that I went too far, and I'm using this as a excuse to just go for a bicycle or go for a walk. At the same time, I could confirm that the society has been very, I don't know what's the English word, but they really stick to the rules imposed by the government. And we're all in this together. In every day, 8 p.m., everyone goes out of their balconies and they're clapping as a way to show support to everyone that still has to work. And you got to remember, Spain has a history of a lot of separatistic movements, and the government was never really too popular. The land of the Basques, the Catalonia, Barcelona always tried to become independent. And yet, when the big problem like this exists, whether the total lockdown is the best way to go about, the history will show us. But it seems like everyone is really sticking to what was given by the top, because everyone wants this to be over again. And we've been already in the lockdown for, I think, over a month. I already lost count.
Interesting. Well, it's been great having you on the show. I definitely want to come back and kind of pick your brain in terms of alternative energies, so we'll definitely have you back on soon. Thanks for stopping in.
Thank you so much.
All right, so for all of you listening in over on iTunes or Spotify, make sure and drop us a like. Give us some feedback for the Disruption Decade as well. We'd love to get your notes. And if you want to reach out to me direct, hit me up on Twitter, just at Paul Barron. That's the best way to give me some ideas. If you have, maybe you're an author and you have a book that you've just released, or you're an expert on a topic that really tunes into the disruption decade. And really what this podcast is about is technologies, innovation, political topics, and society and culture that we are going to see over the next 10 years completely transform in terms of everything we do. So that's really what we're looking for. If you've got a great idea, just shoot me an email. Also, you can shoot me an email to paul@foodabletv.com. We will catch you next time right here on the Disruption Decade.